1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When will I finish counting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh no! What am I gonna do? This is gonna take forever. 1, 2.
Young lady, what are you trying to do?
I'm trying to count all this stuff. But then every time I start, it seems like I can't finish.
Oh, wait, just a moment.
Okay.
I got an idea.
Okay, what's that?
Why can't you sort out these items into different groups?
Oh, you mean I put all the balls in one place? And then all the crayons in one place?
Yes, of course.
Wow, that's a great idea. I had never thought of that. Thank you.
And you can use these balls.
Wow, thank you so much. This is so helpful. Now, I can sort all these items into different bowls.
Yes.
I can put the balls in one bowl.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can put the Lego in one bowl. I can collect all the markers in one bowl. And then all the crayons in one bowl. You know what? This reminds me of the biology topic, classification of living things, where we sort all different living organisms into different groups based on their similarities and differences. My name is Dr. Maria Sala, and today I'll be walking you through Introduction to the Classification of Living Organisms. Thank you. There are millions of living organisms worldwide, not to mention the fact that there are over 7,000 languages in the world. Now, how can I identify and name an organism in such a way that all people all around the world can realize that this is the organism I'm speaking of? Imagine, for example, I'll speak of the dog. In English, I call it dog. In Swahili, the name is mbwa. And in French, it's chien. Now, if I speak these different languages in different places, who will know that I'm speaking of a dog? That's where classification comes in. Now, I need to have a system whereby these organisms are not only grouped into different groups, but then they're given a scientific name, which is accepted by scientists all over the world. And that is the benefit of classification. So, what is classification? Classification is the sorting of organisms into different groups based on their similarities and differences. What are the advantages of classifying organisms? The first major advantage is that placing these millions of living organisms in different groups according to their similarities helps us to study these living organisms. Because when I have a group of organisms with similar features, it's much easier to study them. The second advantage of studying classification is that classification, as I said earlier on, gives organisms a scientific name. And this scientific name is commonly accepted by scientists all over the world or globally. The third advantage is that knowing the features of one organism in a particular group enables me to predict similar features of a different organism in the same group. Taking, for example, cows are mammals and human beings are mammals. If I know what a cow's heart looks like, I can also predict the size and the shape and the form of the heart of a human being. Now, how do we classify organisms? Do we simply consider one single feature? For example, the presence of legs, in organisms, or the presence of wings in organisms? Or do we have to go deeper and look into biological features of the organisms, biochemical processes that these organisms have, and internal and the external structure of the organisms? This question leads us to the two systems of classification, which are the artificial system of classification and the natural system of classification. So, what are these systems of classification? The artificial system of classification involves placing living organisms into different groups based on their observable features. When I say observable, I mean the features that we can see with our eyes. For example, the structure of the body, how this organism moves, whether the organism has legs or has wings. So these are the features that help us classify these organisms in the artificial system of classification. Whereas the natural system of classification involves many more processes, as we shall see later on. Take, for example, a bee, a bat, a butterfly, a snake, a worm, and a starfish. If we have all these organisms together, and I am asked to classify these organisms using the artificial system of classification, I'll take a look at them and then I'll say, okay, maybe some of these organisms have wings. And I'll take these organisms which have wings, such as the bee, the bat, and the butterfly, and I'll put them in one group. And then I'll take the organisms which are remaining and I'll say, these ones don't have legs. And then I'll put these remaining organisms into another group. So this is a way of classifying organisms based on the artificial system of classification. As the scientist, I get to decide which feature I choose when I'm classifying these organisms using the artificial system of classification. Now, this system has several advantages and it has several disadvantages. The first advantage, as most of us have already seen, is that it is easy. Anyone can use the artificial system of classification because all I have to do is to look and identify a feature that certain organisms have in common. The second advantage of the artificial system of classification is that it is a very fast system. As you have seen, I've classified the previous organisms really quickly. And the third advantage of the artificial system of classification is that it is a cheap system. It only needs me to see the organisms, maybe in person or in terms of a picture, and then I can classify these organisms into different groups. These are the advantages of the artificial system of classification. But then this system also has its disadvantages. What are these? The first one is that some organisms which are not similar in their internal makeup are placed in the same group simply because they have similar external features. And then some organisms which have similar internal makeup are placed in different groups simply because they don't look alike externally. Another disadvantage of this system is that it is less accurate because it uses very few observable features. And the third disadvantage of this system of classification is that in reality, it depends on the scientist's preference. So whoever is the scientist gets to choose how they classify the different organisms. And therefore, it brings a lot of differences in the classification of organisms worldwide. The natural system of classification, on the other hand, deals with placing organisms into different groups based on both their internal and external features. And this system of classification was first introduced by the scientist Carl Linnaeus. And in this system of classification, scientists have to observe different things. They observe biological processes such as reproduction and respiration processes of these organisms that they're going to place in different groups. They also observe internal structure and the external structure of these organisms that they're placing in different groups. But then they also have to observe biochemical processes such as the secretion of hormones or photosynthesis in these organisms. This system of classification also has its advantages and its disadvantages. One of the advantages of the natural system of classification is that a wide range of features is used, and therefore it's much more accurate. Another advantage is that scientists classify these organisms using similar features and observations, and therefore it's a system of classification which is accepted worldwide. Every scientist all over the world will place different organisms in the same group that they will be placed in a different part of the world. The disadvantages of this system of classification is that this system is time consuming. It takes a lot of time to be able to observe the internal and external makeup of organisms. Another disadvantage is that this system needs a lot of research and a lot of knowledge, and therefore it needs skilled personnel. Not everyone can classify organisms in the natural system of classification. To simplify the process of classification, organisms are placed into major groups which are known as kingdoms. And these kingdoms are Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, Kingdom Monera, Kingdom Protoctista, and Kingdom Fungi. These kingdoms are then further subdivided into different levels. The phylum level for certain kingdoms and the division level, particularly for the Kingdom Plantae, that's the kingdom involving plants. And then from this level, we go to the class level, and then the order level, and the family level, and then the genus level, and then the species level. Now, the species level is the lowest level in this order of classification. And in this level, there are organisms which are least varied. And these organisms can interbreed to produce viable offspring. When I say viable offspring, I mean offspring which can also produce children of their own. Now, this whole system of levels of classification is also known as taxonomic units or taxa. We'll take an example of classifying the human being in this taxonomic unit or taxa levels of classification. So, the human being belongs to the kingdom Animalia. And then, the human being belongs to the phylum Chordata. At a lower level, which is the class level, the human being is in the class Mammalia. And the human being is in the order Primate. The human being is in the family Hominidae, the genus Homo, and the species Sapiens. At the kingdom level, there are so many organisms which are animals. But then, as we go lower, there are less organisms which are in the phylum Chordata, that is, animals with the backbones. This goes on for all the other levels up to the species level. And as I said earlier on, the species level is the lowest level of this taxonomic units or taxonomic ranks of classification. And at this level, these organisms which are found in this level can interbreed to produce viable offspring. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some species which can interbreed although they are in different species. There are few exceptions to this rule. Taking for example, a horse and a donkey can interbreed, and when they interbreed, they produce a mule. But this mule cannot have offspring of its own. Another example are dogs and wolves can interbreed to produce offspring which are viable. That means that they can also produce offspring of their own. We do have a scientific system of naming these living organisms. And this scientific system of naming the living organisms is known as binomial nomenclature. And this system involves naming the organisms in two different names. For example, the human being is known as Homo sapiens. If we remember from the previous slide, Homo is the genus level in the taxonomic rank of classification for human beings, and sapiens is the species level. So whenever you have the name of the genus level of an organism, that forms the first part of your scientific name. And then the species level forms the second part of the scientific name. This system of classification was given to us by the scientist Carl Linnaeus, who began this process of classifying organisms in this way. Now, it's important to note that the first letter of the scientific name should be written in capital, and then the second letter can begin in a small letter. When these names are written in published documents, they have to be in italic format. But then, when they are handwritten or simply typed, we have to underline the whole name within the writing. Now, the genus or the first name in the scientific name is also known as the generic name. And the second name or the species name is also known as the specific name. Therefore, all living organisms on the world have a scientific name which involves the generic name and the specific name. Now, let's take a look if you can remember what we've spoken about in this lesson by trying to answer the questions that shall come upon the screen. For joining me in the introduction to the classification of living organisms.